The dirt was barely settled over my wife's grave when my own children started measuring our home for renovations. After 45 years of marriage, burying my beloved wife Evelyn should have been a time for shared grief. But for my son, Brandon, and daughter Chloe, it was a celebration. They had just inherited her $80 million corporate empire, complete with penthouses, luxury vehicles, and massive estates. Meanwhile, I was handed a single, faded manila envelope. Inside sat a slip of paper with an offshore account number and a short note in Evelyn's handwriting that read, "For the man who truly loved me." To my children, I was nothing more than an old gardener who got lucky marrying a visionary woman. What Brandon and Chloe never knew was that 40 years ago, I sold my own thriving logistics firm to rescue Evelyn's family business from total bankruptcy. I poured every cent I had into her company, built its core foundation, and quietly stepped into the background so she could shine. Watching my children laugh with investors at the reception, I realized my silence had cultivated dangerous greed. 2 days later, the family lawyer officially read the will, dividing the entire operational empire equally between Brandon and Chloe. The attorney then slid that dusty, manila envelope across the polished table toward me. Brandon snickered out loud, mocking the envelope and stating that late. Mom clearly knew I would not know what to do with real money anyway. Chloe feigned sympathy, offering me $1,000 monthly allowance on the condition that I pack up my things and vacate the master suite by the weekend. 48 hours after the reading, Chloe and her husband Justin handed me an official 30-day eviction notice, though they made it clear they wanted me gone immediately to stage the house for photos. I did not fight them or cause a scene. I packed a single suitcase with a few clothes, my shaving kit, and my favorite framed picture of Evelyn. As I walked down the long driveway, Brandon called out from the foyer, telling me not to forget my house keys. I dropped them onto the entryway console and walked into the cold afternoon air, the hidden empire. That night, sitting on a creaky bed in a cheap motel, I finally opened the envelope properly. Inside was a heavy brass vault key, a digital security token, and a second note from Evelyn admitting she always saw the selfish path our children were taking. On the back were login credentials, a routing code, and a contact number for a senior attorney named Mr. Vance. When I logged into the private portal with trembling hands, I gasped. It was not a modest retirement fund. It was the parent holding trust that controlled the entire corporate architecture. Evelyn had secretly separated the operational business from everything that gave it actual value. I now owned every patent, the corporate headquarters, the land deeds, and over $100 million in liquid cash reserves. Brandon and Chloe had inherited nothing more than an empty shell with payroll obligations and desk space, completely unaware that they were now my legal tenants. The next morning, when I tried to buy breakfast, my personal bank card was declined because Brandon had frozen my accounts, hoping hunger would force me to beg for that insulting allowance. I snapped the useless plastic card in half and immediately called Mr. Vance, who had been waiting for my call all along. Within the hour, a private car picked me up and took me to his understated office downtown. Vance explained that our children's company owed the parent trust millions in back rent and licensing fees that Evelyn had quietly forgiven over the years. Those debts were still legally binding, and calling them in would bankrupt the operational company in a matter of weeks. Furthermore, Vance revealed that Chloe's husband Justin and Brandon's wife Sarah had been quietly siphoning corporate funds to buy luxury yachts and cover failed real estate baits. Evelyn had designed this entire arrangement a final test for our children. If they had treated me with basic human decency, I would have welcomed them into the fold. But because they cast me out, they had signed their own financial death warrant. Vance and I issued a routine default notice, quietly setting the trap. While I waited patiently in the shadows, my children blindly built castles on sinkholes. Brandon used the corporate headquarters, building a structure he did not actually own as collateral for a massive personal credit line, signing personal guarantees. Without reading the fine print, Chloe made a heavy down payment on an ocean yacht using corporate credit, while Sarah went on wild shopping sprees. When the default notice arrived at Brandon's desk, he dismissed it as clerical error and tossed it straight into the trash, forfeiting their legal grace period. 3 days later, the entire facade detonated when Brandon's banker called to inform him that a title search showed the company owned zero real estate or patents. His credit line was frozen instantly, Chloe's cards were declined at high-end stores, and corporate accounts were locked down nationwide. In a panic, the four of them met in secret and decided to illegally sell off company servers and vehicles for quick cash to cover their personal debts, completely oblivious to the fact that every single transaction was being mirrored live to my legal team. To test them one last time, I wore my oldest flannel shirt and worn boots into the corporate lobby, asking Brandon for the allowance he had promised me. Instead of helping, Brandon raised his voice, mocking me in front of the entire staff and calling me a useless hanger-on before having security throw me onto the sidewalk. I recorded the entire interaction. Desperate for capital, Brandon and Justin then met, with an overseas beer offering pennies on the dollar for the headquarters building. The overseas beer was actually a front, operated by Mr. Vance. Sitting in a dim room, Brandon and Chloe signed a stack of documents without reading the legal clauses buried inside. By signing, they officially confessed to commingling funds, liquidating unowned assets, and acknowledging my trust's absolute legal ownership over the entire business. They thought they were securing a desperate financial lifeline, but in reality, they had just handed us bulletproof evidence of their own corporate fraud. The following morning, 10 forensic auditors marched into the corporate headquarters with a legal mandate to seize every record. Believing it was a simple tax audit, a panicked Brandon barricaded himself inside the executive suite and fed physical documents into a shredder. Totally unaware that every file was already stored digitally, he was not destroying evidence. He was committing fresh felonies on camera. Still delusional, Brandon called an emergency board meeting and invited press reporters, planning to spin the chaos as a bold restructuring. As Brandon lied to the board about the company's liquidity and prepared to sign a $20 million parachute deal, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. I walked into the boardroom wearing a bespoke Italian suit, accompanied by Mr. Vance and a team of forensic investigators. Brandon shouted for security to throw me out again, but Vance calmly warned the guards that touching the legal owner of the entire building would result in immediate assault charges. The guards instantly stepped back. Vance dropped thick red files onto the table, exposing the reality to the board members and journalists. The operational business owed my trust $15 million in unpaid rent and was in catastrophic default. Every patent, software license, and property belonged exclusively to me. I then revealed the truth they had never known, that I was the one who funded and saved the family empire 40 years ago, stepping into the background so their mother could shine. Evelyn's envelope was a test of their character, and they had failed completely. The board members dropped the payout contracts immediately, disgusted by the revelation. Realizing the ship was sinking, Justin and Sarah began blaming Brandon and Chloe, trying to shield themselves from legal liability. Arguments broke out as the family turned on each other right in front of the cameras. I signaled Mr. Vance, who handed Brandon and Chloe a final eviction notice granting them exactly 24 hours to hand over all corporate assets and clear out their personal belongings. The downfall was swift, unforgiving, and absolute. Every personal guarantee Brandon had signed came due at once, leading to the repossession of his luxury vehicles and real estate, while Sarah handed him divorce papers on her way out. Chloe's yacht was impounded at the harbor, and Justin filed for separation to avoid her mounting criminal liabilities. Within weeks, the two children, who had once measured my home for renovations before their mother was even buried, were left standing on the street with absolutely nothing. A month later, Brandon and Chloe appeared at the front iron gates of the main estate, looking unwashed and wearing second-hand clothes. Brandon wept openly, begging for help and admitting they had hit rock bottom. Chloe pressed her face against the iron bars, desperately asking for the same $1,000 monthly allowance they had once dangled over my head. I looked down at them from the driveway and felt no anger, only a deep, hollow realization of how completely greed had ruined their lives. I told them calmly that money offered without respect is not generosity, but merely a tool to control others. I reminded them that 40 years ago, their mother and I built our initial life from nothing through hard work, sacrifice, and mutual trust, and that it was now time for them to learn those same foundational values on their own. I turned around and walked back toward the house, leaving them standing outside the gated property they had once evicted me from. Setting boundaries with toxic people is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of self-preservation. Sometimes you have to step away from the people you love most to protect yourself from what greed has turned them into. Family is not defined by shared blood, but by respect, loyalty, and genuine care. I walked into my home with a clear conscience, ready to live the rest of my life honoring the true legacy Evelyn and I had built together. If this story reminded you of the value of family and self-respect, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share real, deep stories every single week. Don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.